presenting Mr. Dodd with his story, A Secret to Never Be Repeated. Please.
Good evening. We heard one accent, that was from England. I'm from New York. I'm walking here. I have a secret that I have kept pretty much to myself for some 34 years. In 1988, I became a United States Ranger at Glacier National Park in Montana. I was 60 years old then. I'm now 90. The story I'm about to tell, no ranger would want anyone to know about. I tell it to you now, so please don't repeat it. Promise? Promise. Especially to other rangers. In 1984, 4 years before becoming a ranger, I visited my daughter Deborah and her husband Jeff in Coram, Montana, 5 miles outside of Glacier National Park. I started reading a true story called The Night of the Grizzlies, later made into a movie, which is about two 19-year-old women mauled to death by two different grizzly bears on the same night in two different Glacier Park locations, 8 miles apart. The park had not had a fatality caused by a grizzly bear in over 57 years since 1910, when the park opened. Now, this is a relief map I made and donated to the park, showing the areas where the two women were killed. At the same time, I happened to read in a local newspaper that a man recently murdered 4 people with a chainsaw in nearby backcountry. Before I left my home in Florida for Montana, my wife and I separated. The year before, I had suffered a heart attack. Jeff thought that a hike in the backcountry would be good for me. I agreed. Just before leaving on my hike, Deborah showed me a newspaper clipping of a ranger who had climbed a tree to escape a grizzly bear and then had his foot bitten off. I asked, why show me this now? Her answer was, I just want you to be careful. Jeff was a mountain man and climbed a different peak every month. He worked for the park on the trail crew. His comment about grizzly bears was very interesting. He said that he had run into grizzly on the trail who would charge up to him, stand on their hind legs, snort, and run off. He said that if that happens, just stand still and don't look at the bear. If they attack, play dead. Don't get between a mother and her cubs. That's fatal. And when you're hiking, make a lot of noise. And always use common sense. He gave me a map of where I was to hike and drove me and my Shih Tzu dog, Prima Donna Yen, to beautiful Bowman Lake, 6 miles below the Canadian border. He gave me some sardines and carrots, enough food for my 3-day, 25-mile hike. The first night in my little pup tent was an adventure. It started to rain heavily. My dog ran off in the rain chasing a deer. I caught him after several hours. When I woke the next morning, I found that he had chewed up my dentures. We headed for a mountain trail. I had tied some pots and pans to my leg to make noise when I walked. At the head of the trail was a large orange sign with black letters that read, Bear Country, do not hike alone, do not hike with animals. Are they talking to me? I found out later the reason it wasn't smart to hike with a dog is because if the dog chases a bear, the bear will chase the dog back to you. Up the mountain trail we went. It had many switchbacks. Every time I came to a switchback, I had to take a 5-minute break. I still felt the after effects of the heart attack the year before. I found out later the trail was named Heart Attack Trail. As I hiked, I would yell, "Are there any bears up here?" Prima and I slept silently and soundly on top of the mountain. The next day, we climbed down the trail and walked beside a stream for 11 miles. We came to the most pristine sight I had ever seen, a beautiful lake surrounded on every side by snow-covered peaks. I called out my wife's name, Nancy, and listened to the echo bouncing off the hills. Nancy, 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 Nancy. Then it started. What was that? Thump, 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 thump. There it goes again. Thump, 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 thump. It kept repeating over and over. What is that? Sounds like a motorboat engine trying to start. No, it can't be. We're 30 miles from civilization. Sounds like someone dribbling a basketball, beating a drum. Maybe rocks falling. No, it can't be. Rocks falling down a mountainside would not have the same steady rhythm. Then my mind drifted back to scenes of Tarzan movies of the 30s. It's a bear beating his chest. Does he know I'm here? I climbed a tree and yelled down to Prima, "You're on your own." I stayed up in that tree until the sound stopped, and after what seemed like an eternity, came down. Then Prima and I bedded down at the head of beautiful Quartz Lake. The next morning, I repacked and headed up the other side and began my return to Bowman Lake and the end of my hike. Even though it was early spring, it felt like summer. As I entered the mountain, it suddenly became winter. Snow everywhere, and deep. I saw some bear tracks in the snow. Just doesn't look so good. After about a mile, I slipped into a creek bed. I felt so tired, I thought for a moment, I'll just lie down. No, use common sense. Jeff's last words to me. I jumped up and hiked back to summertime, took off my wet clothes, put on some dry ones, and headed down the way I had come up, back to my campground the night before. I was exhausted. I couldn't even completely put up my little pup tent. I hung my wet clothes on some branches and bushes and went to sleep about 7 p.m. Then I heard the familiar thump, 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 thump. Oh no, he knows I'm here. The sound kept coming closer. He would stop and start. Prima was barking. I wet my pants. I started reading Matthew in the Bible. The sound stopped right out the front of my tent. Nothing happened. What is he waiting for? I thought, I'll look at him with all the love in my heart, and maybe he'll love me back. Slowly, ever so slowly, I lifted the tent flap. A pair of boots! Who's standing in them? It's the chainsaw murderer! He found me! I'm done! Then his high-pitched voice, Dick, are you okay? It was Jeff. Jeff had been looking for me, afraid that I had been trapped in the snow, and I said to him, what was that thump, 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 thump? Oh, that, he said. That's a grouse standing on a log, flapping his wings. Thank you for listening. And please do not tell any rangers about this.